we first start off with guided math, we do a pretest, and we usually do the pretest about before the unit preceding it is done. So we'll take the pretest, and when we take the pretest, it'll establish, we can figure out who needs what and each kid, and we break them up into groups that way.
In my classroom, I do guided math where I take 2 rotations of kids, and I always take one group at a time, a small group, and then the rest of my kids are doing a build activity, which means buddy games or using manipulatives, independent work, learning with numbers and doing math, which means that they're at the laptops.
So we are going to start our math rotations now. So we will be splitting up into our math
it's right after my whole group instruction, and I'll normally have them, every topic I set new math groups. So that's kind of where I really look at the pretest and I say, okay, who is going to need enrichment and who's going to need almost reteaching after every single lesson.
It's actually a lot like Daily 5, where you start with one activity at a time, you model it, you talk about the expectations, you practice it a lot. For the first 3 weeks, we just practiced and modeled and practiced again. It really takes a lot of initial work to get it to look the way it does for the rest of the year. And you always have to come back to it and re-practice and relearn.
When we go back to the small groups, I have the kids broken up into groups depending upon how they did on the pretest. And so, I have a reteaching group and then I have an extension group, and it really depends on what they need.
So normally I'll set up a chart, or if they're not doing a smartboard activity, I'll put it on the smartboard, or sometimes I'll just write it up on the whiteboard. It will list 1, 2, 3, 4, here's what station you start at. If you start at 2, then you go to 3 next, and you start at 3, you go to 4. And so they just look up there and they say, okay, I tell them, okay, this group goes to 1, this group goes to 2, and then from there they just rotate around. And then if we don't finish all of the rotations within that time, we just start back up where we started from the next day.
Over the years, I have so many different games that are practicing, and they're dice games, card games. The kids really enjoy them. Then there's another station that's usually a skill review, and what I'll do is I'll take the previous lessons that we've done. Like, so for example, we started with place value this year, so now we're in the beginning of second quarter. I bring in a place value game to review. And so there's a skill game there that's a review kind of station.
Each rotation is 20 minutes. And that can vary. If I have more time or I need less time with the groups, I'll do faster rotations. But I like having longer time with the kids to really get into the activity.
The reteaching group, I will do lots of practice problems with them, and it's just me guiding them through it. And then as it gets progressively towards the group that doesn't need the reteaching, they need the more enrichment, we'll look at the enrichment worksheets in Envision, and I'll throw those problems at them. Or we do a lot more of the writing to explain or Socratic dialogue, of getting them to explain their thought processes, or sharing how did they solve the problems.
If they're needing the enrichment, they'll get that in my small group. So that will be one station. I'll normally do some type of technology station. Sometimes that's extra math online, just having them get on and practice their facts. Sometimes that's more like the smartboard activity that we did. Sometimes there's something that we can pull in from there. And then another one would be independent practice, where they'll be practicing on their own at their desk, just getting some extra practice. And then if they need help, they can ask a partner or someone in their group or outside of their group.
Third station's at our smartboard. And the smartboard is going to be the game that I've modeled for them, usually at the beginning of the week. That's a smartboard game going over the skills that we're talking about. So, for example, multiplication. So they'll do double digit by single digit multiplication games on the smartboard. And they know how to take turns, and so one person will be doing the work up on the board, and there's usually like a check feature. And then the rest of the kids have their dry erase boards, and they're sitting in front doing the problems too. So that way they're all working.
I do a lot of Kagan with my kids. I do a lot of modeling. I do a lot of practicing with manipulatives, using whiteboards, having them do Rally Coach, where they're explaining what they're doing to another student and they're having to interact with each other.
For finding the mean and mode and average of something, we did all these different, they choose one type of car, and then they go online and look for the prices on maybe the different places, so like CarMax, what would the price be if they got it at that dealership, and then they would average the price for that. So that would be an enrichment project where they're researching and seeing how it is applied in the real world.
If you go on Envision, it says My Tests, and it says the topic test. And so we give them the same pre-test and the same post-test, so you can compare the data for how they grew and how they did. You know, and I do have kids scoring 100% on the pre-test. And so when they score 100% on the pre-test, we push them in, and our whole grade works together and does an enrichment group for them, like a web quest. And they do the web quest throughout the small group times. And then when they're doing the web quest, they will do the performance task in the book versus doing the exact same test that was on Envision.
The most recent one that we've done from Sean is it's called Fibonacci Patterns, and so it's a web quest that they'll get online, and they will be looking for those patterns in other places besides, you know, they'll show you what the pattern is, and then they'll be trying to find the pattern in other real world situations.
They do have to turn in a lot of times whatever they're working on. It just depends on the activity. A lot of times it's between two kiddos, and I can keep my eye on the groups as they're working, or if it's one of the independent activities, they have to turn it into the turn-in tray when they're done.
At the ends of the groups, I'll always say, how do you feel like you did? How on task were you? Do you feel like you did your very best, putting in your effort and you were on task? You know, thumbs up, thumbs sideways, and then if I start noticing a kid's always thumb sideways, we'll maybe go and sit and make a plan. Okay, I'm noticing that you're always a sideways thumb. You are saying that you're not always doing your best. How can we get you to perform your best every day?